I don't know its taste, so it doesn't bother me.
There's an Eastern wisdom that says if something important fails 3 times in a row, just let it go. I consider the first time wasn't unpleasant, but not as pleasant as many think.
Why didn't you have sex until you were over 30?
I didn't have sex until I was 33. It's not that I didn't have the desire, but it wasn't strong enough for me to want to start any relationships. I didn't have relationships, and consequently, no sex. I think I had sex, but it depends on how you define it. If by sex you mean the traditional act that can lead to having children and requires contraception, then I didn't have that. But I did have oral, petting, and masturbation. I never had strong urges or felt like I desperately wanted sex.
I didn't have sex until I was 32 years old, until I got married. This was my conscious decision, not to have sex before marriage. As I lead a Christian lifestyle, I wanted my husband to be my first and only man.
Was the long absence of sex a problem for you?
I didn't consider it a problem 85% of the time, but 15% of the time I did. Because there's a societal opinion. People talk about this topic eventually, and it affected me a little, but not enough for me to worry too much.
It wasn't a problem for me at all. My life was bright and full even without a sexual life until 30.
There's an Eastern wisdom that says if something important fails 3 times in a row, just let it go and live peacefully. Why create additional problems for yourself?
Did you feel self-conscious about your virginity?
Probably, yes, I did at some point. When talking to a girl and it doesn't work out because of this, it can be uncomfortable. In a way, every person is incomplete. I don't drive a car, so I'm incomplete as a driver. But in another professional sense, I am quite complete. It's a matter of where a person's weak points are and which ones they can work on. There have been times in my life when I thought there might be something wrong with me, but since I had many other interests and hobbies, it didn't bother me too much. If a man needs to boast about the number of partners he has to assert himself among others, including other men, then most likely he has an insecurity somewhere else.
Have you ever felt a strong desire for sex?
Well, on a physiological level, there are different hormonal balances throughout the month. I might have wanted something romantic, but specifically thinking I want sex didn't really happen. Maybe because, like wanting an exotic fruit I've never tried, I don't know its taste, so it doesn't bother me.
Well, the need for sex can be satisfied in other ways, so I didn't feel that lack. It was more about the closeness with another person. We all watch videos, series, movies, and they portray a certain image. I probably felt the lack of that image, but I found ways to satisfy it. There are special series, and for me, Korean dramas helped a lot. What I lacked in relationships I covered with these dramas. Also, I have fantasies. I am an introvert, and I fantasize a lot. To make up for the lack of real relationships, I would run a sort of standard program in my head before going to sleep. I would play out these scenarios, and that was enough for me. The lack of something in life is probably felt by those who once had it. I can only theoretically know that it might bring great happiness, or maybe not. I find great happiness in being able to communicate with girls in the way I can. There are classic known methods like masturbation. It helps a lot when you lack sex.
Did you always tell your partner about your virginity?
I told all the girls that I was a virgin, all of them. I saw no reason to hide it. Many reacted strangely. Either they thought I was lying or thought I was some kind of inferior man. Specifically, with my girlfriend, I said that I was a virgin. My girlfriend reacted completely normally. It didn't cause any abnormal reaction. Yes, I've been in a relationship for 2 years now. It's the only relationship in my life. Yes, if I have been talking with someone for a long time, and in such cases I consider the possibility of intimate relations, then of course I tell the person that my abilities are limited in some ways. I've never had certain experiences, so the person doesn't build any illusions or false hopes. Outwardly, there isn't much negativity, but the person might think to themselves that they should consider other options if this one doesn't work out. Relationships without sex in the usual sense lasted the longest for about 1.5 years. They didn't really end, they are on pause.
I didn't have problems with guys in relationships because I didn't plan to have sex before marriage. My closest friends and surroundings are all believers who share the same views as I do, so there were no problems. But at school or work, if you let people know that I'm not planning anything more, when someone hugs you or something, you react in a way that shows, "Don't touch me." No questions arose.
Recall your first sex. Were you nervous because of inexperience?
The emotions were positive because it was wow, in itself is a pleasure. But since I now have more than 2 years of experience, I consider the first time wasn't unpleasant, but not as pleasant as many think. Simply because I was inexperienced, and the girl wasn't very experienced either. Generally, the first time when two people are doing it for the first time, it doesn't go very well. Although, I can correct myself. The first time I managed to do it 2.5 times, but by the third time, I was too tired.
Of course, I prepared for starting an intimate life. When my fiancé and I agreed that we would get married, I read articles on the topic to understand the process and what happens. Our first experience matched what I expected. Maybe not in every detail, but the first and subsequent experiences were positive. Once I got married and we had an intimate life, I regretted not marrying earlier. Not because of sex, but overall, because of the combination of all factors. We could have married 5 or 7 years earlier, but it happened as it did. And also partly because of sex.
What are the downsides of a long absence of sex?
I wouldn't say there are any. Everything works probably the same as for those who had sex. I don't think there's much difference between masturbation and sex. In fact, it's easier to satisfy oneself than with a girl, and it's quicker. I understand that maybe if I had it, I would have more attention from girls and some kind of support that might be lacking sometimes.
The only thing that sometimes bothered me was going to the gynecologist and explaining that I hadn't had sex. They look at it differently. Some sighed, knowing they would have to examine me differently. But there were no questions. Based on what I read before starting an intimate life, before marriage, I understood that there could be different situations and physiology. But also, from what I read, I knew that many issues are solvable. When my husband and I got married and started our intimate relationship, we didn't have any problems with compatibility. On the contrary, we realized how good it was. It was a wonderful moment.
Are there any benefits to not having sex for a long time?
I see many classmates or university mates who married. Sometimes it is presented as a peak achievement. Some had children, but many have already divorced. I didn't do either, and my life is stable. It was positive for me because I viewed my girlfriend as a partner, not as some celestial being to worship. This is important because, having lived so long, I saw how others who approached this process at a younger age with less psychological stability handled it. I can add that I entered relationships not for sex, although partly for it. I entered relationships because I wanted to understand what a relationship with a girl is, why it's needed, and if I needed it. I clearly informed my girlfriend about this, and she knew.
The fact that we are each other's first and only partners helps me trust my husband much more. If he managed to stay faithful before marriage when he was free, then there's a much higher chance that he will be faithful to me now in our marriage. I wanted my husband to be my one and only, and for me to be his one and only. Just the two of us, our life together, and no one else, no previous experiences. We are discovering things ourselves, making mistakes, finding ways to enjoy it, all on our own.